Hey, have you seen my phone? Tim called out to the empty room, his voice bouncing off the cluttered walls of his small apartment. His friend Dave shuffled into the room, a half-eaten sandwich in hand. Nah, man, I think it's in the bedroom, Dave mumbled with a mouthful, nodding towards the hallway. Tim sighed and disappeared down the corridor, returning moments later with a slightly crumpled device. Thanks, Tim said, unlocking the screen and scrolling through his notifications. You're not going to believe this. Someone posted an old episode of One Punch Man, but it's like nothing we've ever watched before. Dave leaned over, curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Tim tapped on the link, and the video began to play. The familiar opening theme blared from the phone's tiny speakers, but the visuals were distorted, as if they'd been compressed and then stretched back out again. The colors were off, the lines fuzzy. It was like watching the show through a foggy lens. Looks like a bootleg, Dave said, skeptically eyeing the screen. Tim shrugged, his thumb hovering over the volume button. Maybe, but it's the only version I can find of this supposedly deleted episode. And it's titled The Day Everything Changed. The video continued to load, the anticipation thick in the air. The two friends settled onto the couch, the scent of old pizza and stale beer reminding them of countless nights spent binge-watching anime. As the opening credits faded, the scene looked eerily similar to the show's usual setting, the bustling cityscape of Z City. But there was something unsettling about it, something that didn't quite match up with their memories. The buildings were taller, the shadows darker, and the people on the street moved with an urgency that was almost panic. The camera panned to Saitama, the hero with unrivaled power, standing on a rooftop, staring out over the city with a look of utter despair etched into his normally stoic face. What the hell? Tim whispered, his eyes glued to the screen. Dave leaned in closer. I don't remember this at all. The scene shifted abruptly, and they found themselves in a world they didn't recognize. The city was in ruins, the sky a sickly shade of green, and monstrous figures roamed the streets. The usual background sounds of the show were replaced by a low, constant hum that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. The two friends exchanged a look of confusion, but before they could say anything, the video froze. A glitch message flashed across the screen. Prepare for the unseen truth. Prepare for the end of your world. Then the screen went black. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the hair on the back of their necks stood up. They heard a faint sound, like the rustling of fabric in the stillness. They turned around, expecting to see nothing but the pile of dirty laundry in the corner, but instead, there was Saitama. The real Saitama, standing right behind the couch, his iconic yellow jumpsuit looking tattered and stained, his eyes a deep, unsettling red. Without a word, without a hint of his usual playfulness, he swung his arm back and punched Dave. The force was so immense, it was as if the very fabric of reality had torn apart. Dave's head flew off in a spray of crimson, and his body collapsed to the floor like a rag doll. The sandwich slipped from his lifeless hand, the bread landing with a dull thud. Tim couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He watched in horror as Saitama approached him, his steps slow and deliberate. The hero's expression was unreadable, his eyes now a void that seemed to suck all light and hope from the room. Tim's heart hammered in his chest, his mind racing with thoughts of his friend, the life he was about to lose, and the inexplicable terror that had invaded his sanctuary. The moment felt like an eternity as Saitama's hand drew closer, and then it was over. A swift, powerful blow, and Tim's vision went dark. But unlike Dave, he didn't find oblivion. He was ripped from his body, his consciousness floating in a space that was both nothing and everything at once. He was now a ghostly spectator, forced to watch the events unfold in the living room as if he were still there. The screen flickered back to life, the distorted episode of One Punch Man playing once more. Saitama, the twisted version of their beloved hero, continued to battle the monstrous creatures, his fists raining down like the wrath of a vengeful god. Tim's spirit hovered, trapped, as the storyline grew increasingly disturbing, the lines between the show and their reality blurring into a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. The hum grew louder, a constant, maddening presence in his ears, and he realized that the monsters weren't just on the screen anymore. They were all around him, reaching out from the shadows, their twisted forms a reflection of the corrupted world he now inhabited. He was a ghost, bound to this realm by an unseen force, watching as his favorite show transformed into a grim reenactment of his own tragic end. The apartment was no longer a sanctuary but a prison, the walls closing in on him as the monsters grew bolder. Tim tried to scream, to warn the people outside, but no sound came from his spectral form. The air grew colder, the once familiar space now suffocating, the stench of decay seeping through the fabric of his very being. He was trapped in a hell of his own creation, a silent observer to the chaos that had once been his life.